I am Otto Johnson, 32 years old, and I have always lived in the shadow of my golden child sister Rachel. When our grandparents left me their house worth $450,000, I never imagined my own sister would forge documents to steal it from me. What I discovered next still gives me nightmares. Today, Rachel was sentenced to life in prison after the FBI found detailed murder plans with my name at the top of the list. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to hear how I uncovered a murder plot that would have ended my life just 3 weeks ago. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Seattle, the pattern was established early. Rachel, 3 years my senior, excelled at everything she touched. Straight A, student debate team captain, homecoming queen, and later valedictorian. I still remember sitting in the audience at her high school graduation, watching my parents, Walter and Diana, beam with pride as she delivered her speech. "Your sister sets the bar high," Otto Dad would say whenever my report cards came home with B's instead of A's. Not bad grades by any means, but never quite good enough in the Johnson household. Mom kept a special shelf in our living room exclusively for Rachel's trophies and awards. My certificates and ribbons from science fairs and swim meets were tucked away in a drawer in my bedroom. Not hidden exactly, just not prominently displayed. Rachel is our star. I overheard Mom telling her friend once when I was about 12, "Otto is more average, but he tries hard." Those words stung, but I grew accustomed to the dynamic. Rachel was extraordinary and I was ordinary. That was our family story, and we all played our parts. Despite the favoritism, Rachel and I maintained a decent relationship through childhood. She helped me with homework sometimes, and I fixed her bicycle when the chain came off. Normal sibling stuff. We fought occasionally, but nothing beyond typical brother and sister squabbles. After high school, I pursued civil engineering at Washington State University. Not as prestigious as Rachel's Ivy League education at Cornell, but I genuinely enjoyed the work and had a knack for structural analysis. I graduated with honors, though my parents missed the ceremony because Rachel had a law school interview the same weekend. I secured a good position with a reputable firm in Seattle designing municipal infrastructure. The pay was solid, the work meaningful, and I took pride in seeing my bridge and highway designs become reality across the state. I bought a small condo, drove a reliable but modest Honda, and lived within my means. Rachel, meanwhile, abandoned law school after a year, deciding it wasn't her passion. This was the first time I ever saw my parents express disappointment in her. But their dismay was short-lived when she pivoted to real estate and became an overnight sensation in Seattle's booming housing market. "Your sister sold $3 million in property last month alone," Dad announced at a family dinner 4 years ago. "She might even make partner at her firm by next year." While Rachel dominated the luxury real estate market, she also cultivated the perfect personal life. She married Bradley Thompson, a handsome investment banker from a wealthy family. They bought a sprawling home in Bellevue with a view of Lake Washington, drove matching luxury cars, and took extravagant vacations that filled her Instagram feed. Our grandparents, unlike our parents, never played favorites. Grandpa Joe was a retired carpenter who taught me how to use tools and build things with my hands. Grandma Eleanor was a former librarian who shared her love of mystery novels with both Rachel and me equally. Their modest but charming craftsman-style house in Ballard had been the site of countless Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings throughout our childhood. "Otto understands the value of this house," I once overheard Grandpa telling my father. "It is not about the market value. It is about the life lived within these walls." When Grandpa passed away 3 years after Grandma, their will specified that their house, now worth approximately $450,000 in Seattle's inflated market, would go to me. The document explained their decision was based on my appreciation for the craftsmanship and history of the home and my intention to live in and preserve it rather than sell it. The house was the first place I had ever felt truly valued for being exactly who I was. The built-in bookshelves Grandpa and I had constructed together still held Grandma's collection of Agatha Christie novels. The kitchen still had the height markers on the wall, tracking both Rachel's and my growth through the years. The garden still produced the heirloom tomatoes from seeds Grandma had saved for decades. When the will was read, my parents looked surprised but not upset. Rachel smiled and congratulated me, squeezing my shoulder affectionately. "You always loved that old house more than anyone," she said. "It makes perfect sense." I felt guilty receiving such a valuable asset when Rachel got only some family jewelry and photo albums, but she assured me she was happy with the arrangement. "Bradley and I have our dream home already," she said. "This way the family house stays in the family." At 32, I finally had something special that was mine alone. I made plans to move in and renovate the outdated bathroom and kitchen while preserving the historical character of the home. I imagined raising my own family there someday, continuing the legacy of warmth and acceptance our grandparents had created. I never suspected that beneath Rachel's congratulatory smile lurked a storm of resentment that would ultimately threaten not just my inheritance but my very life. The formal reading of my grandparents' will took place 6 months ago in the wood-paneled office of their longtime attorney, Mr. Gregory Wilson. The small gathering included my parents, Rachel, and her husband Bradley and myself, Mr. Lee. Wilson adjusted his reading glasses and detailed the distribution of assets in his monotone voice, pausing only when he reached the section about the house. "To my grandson Otto Johnson, I leave our family home at 2347 Northwest 67th Street free and clear of any encumbrances with the hope that he will cherish it as we have." I felt a surge of emotion hearing those words. This house represented far more than real estate to me. It was Saturday mornings helping Grandpa replace porch railings, learning to use his antique hand tools. It was afternoons in the window seat with Grandma discussing the latest mystery novel we had both read. It was the one place where I never felt compared to Rachel, where I was valued simply for being Otto. The attorney handed me a folder containing the deed, property tax information, and house keys. I ran my fingers over the brass keys, remembering how Grandpa always kept them on a hand-carved wooden fob he had made himself. Rachel approached me after the reading, her smile bright but not quite reaching her eyes. "Congratulations, little brother," she said, examining her manicured nails. "I guess all those weekends you spent helping with home repairs paid off." "You know it was never about that," I replied. "I just loved spending time with them." Of course she nodded. "And now you have got yourself a nice little windfall. Lucky you." Bradley, standing slightly behind his wife, gave me an apologetic look and a firm handshake. "It is a beautiful home with great bones. Let us know if you need any contractor recommendations for updates." I moved into the house the following weekend, bringing my modest belongings from my condo, which I decided to rent out. The first few weeks were blissful, sleeping in the guest room I had used during childhood sleepovers, cooking in Grandma's kitchen, and planning thoughtful renovations that would honor the home's character while updating its functionality. About a month after moving in, I noticed something odd. A property tax notification I had been expecting never arrived. When I called the county assessor's office, they confirmed it had been sent to my address. A few days later, I found it in my mailbox, with the seal broken, resealed with tape. Probably just damaged in delivery, I told myself, dismissing the incident. The following week, Rachel stopped by, unannounced, with a housewarming gift, an expensive bottle of whiskey. "Just checking to see how you are settling in," she said, wandering from room to room, opening closets and cabinets, as if conducting an inspection. "Have you considered what upgrades would bring the most return on investment if you ever decide to sell?" "I am not planning to sell," I replied, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "I am going to live here like Grandpa and Grandma wanted." Rachel laughed lightly. "Well, plans change. And when they do call your big sister, I could get you top dollar for this place." Our parents began suggesting regularly that I should share my good fortune with Rachel. "The house is worth so much now," Mom said during a Sunday visit. "Maybe you could sell it and split the proceeds with your sister. She does have 2 children to think about. Or you could add her name to the deed," Dad suggested. "Keep it in both your names for the whole family." I gently but firmly reminded them that our grandparents had been clear about their wishes. The house was meant for me to live in, not to sell for profit or divide. Rachel began offering to help with renovation plans, stopping by frequently with design magazines and contractor contacts. One evening, I returned home earlier than expected from a dinner with friends and found her in my home office going through papers on my desk. "What are you doing?" I asked, startled to find her there. She barely flinched. "Looking for that contractor's number I gave you last week." I wanted to check if he had time for your bathroom remodel before winter. You could have called or texted me, I said, increasingly uncomfortable. Do not be so uptight, Otto, she replied with a dismissive wave. We are family. We do not need such formalities. When I mentioned the incident to our parents, they chided me for being paranoid and ungenerous with my sister. Rachel is just trying to help you, Mom insisted. She knows more about home values and improvements than you do. You have always been jealous of your sister's success, Dad added, his disappointment evident. Now that you have something she does not, you are being selfish. Their response hurt but did not surprise me. The golden child narrative remained intact even when Rachel's behavior seemed questionable. At a family barbecue the following weekend, tensions simmered beneath forced smiles. Rachel brought up the house, repeatedly asking pointed questions about my renovation budget and timeline in front of everyone. When I tried to change the subject, she persisted. I just want to make sure you do not ruin the property value with amateur DIY projects, she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. It would be a shame to see Grandpa and Grandma's investment diminished. It is not an investment, I countered. It is a home. Rachel rolled her eyes. Everything is an investment, little brother. Some of us understand that better than others. After that gathering, I noticed more concerning signs. Documents in my filing cabinet appeared slightly rearranged. My mail sometimes looked tampered with. The spare key I kept hidden in the garden was not exactly where I had left it. I installed a basic security camera at the front door and changed all the locks, not telling anyone in my family. The next time Rachel stopped by and tried her key, the confusion and anger that flashed across her face confirmed my suspicions. Why would you change the locks without telling me? She demanded. I did not realize you had a key in the first place, I replied calmly. Mom gave me her spare when you moved in, she said, as if it were perfectly normal, in case of emergencies. I confided my growing concerns to my best friend Darren during our weekly basketball game. He had known my family for years and understood the dynamics all too well. Your sister has always had a weird, competitive thing with you, he observed, dribbling the ball thoughtfully. But this seems different. More calculated. Am I overreacting? I asked, genuinely uncertain. Trust your gut, he advised. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Around this time, I met Megan at a mutual friend's dinner party. Smart, compassionate, and refreshingly straightforward, she worked as a child psychologist and immediately picked up on my family dynamic when I described it. Classic golden child and scapegoat roles, she observed on our third date. Your sister might be struggling with your grandparents choosing you for something significant. It challenges the family narrative. With Megan's support and Darren's friendship, I began setting firmer boundaries with my family. I limited Rachel's access to my home and declined her offers to help with renovations. I carefully tracked all important documents related to the house and made digital copies. Little did I know these precautions, while necessary, would prove woefully insufficient against what was coming next. 3 months after moving into my grandparents' house, I decided to refinance the property to fund the renovations. The original mortgage had been paid off years ago, but I needed capital for the substantial updates I had planned. I scheduled an appointment with my bank, gathering all the necessary paperwork, and looking forward to beginning the kitchen remodel I had carefully designed. The loan officer, a friendly woman named Janet, greeted me warmly, but her expression changed as she reviewed my application on her computer. There seems to be some confusion, Mr. Johnson, she said, frowning at her screen. According to county records, you are not the current owner of the property. That is impossible, I replied, leaning forward in my chair. I inherited the house from my grandparents 6 months ago. I have the deed right here. I pulled the document from my folder and handed it to her. She examined it carefully before turning back to her computer. The deed on file with the county shows a transfer of ownership to Rachel Thompson dated last month, she said carefully. Your name does not appear on the current title. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Rachel Thompson, my sister, who had taken her husband's last name. My sister had somehow transferred my house into her name. There has to be a mistake. I insisted, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Can you print whatever document you are looking at? Janet printed the deed transfer form and handed it to me. There it was in black and white, my apparent signature transferring full ownership to Rachel for consideration of family obligations and the sum of $1. The document had been notarized and properly filed with the county, but I had never signed it, never even seen it before this moment. My hands shaking, I called Rachel immediately from the bank's office. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice casual and unconcerned. "What is this about a deed transfer?" I demanded without preamble. A pause. Then, "Oh, you found out sooner than I expected." No denial, no excuse, just cold acknowledgement. "You forged my signature. You stole my house." My voice rose, drawing concerned looks from other bank customers. "I did not steal anything," Rachel replied calmly. "Grandma and Grandpa always intended for me to have the house. They just got confused near the end. I simply corrected a mistake." "That is a lie," I said, my shock giving way to anger. "They specifically wanted me to have it." The will was clear. "Wills can be influenced by whoever spends the most time with elderly people," she countered smoothly. "You manipulated them in their final years, playing the devoted grandson, while I was busy building my career and family. Very convenient for you." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. In Rachel's version of reality, I was the manipulator, and she was the victim. "I am going to fight this," I promised. "This is fraud, Rachel. Criminal fraud." "Good luck proving it," she replied, her voice hardening. "Mom and Dad have already signed affidavits stating they witnessed you agree to transfer the house to me after realizing how unfair the will was to the rest of the family." The betrayal knocked the wind from me. "Our parents were in on it too." "You will regret this," I managed to say before ending the call. I drove straight to the house, my house, only to find the locks changed. A note on the door informed me that I was trespassing on private property, and all my belongings would be available for collection the following Saturday, supervised by Rachel's lawyer. I called our parents next, desperate to understand how they could participate in such a scheme. Mom answered, her voice tight with rehearsed righteousness. "You promised to sign the house over to your sister," she insisted. "We all heard you say it at the family dinner last month. If you are having second thoughts now, that is unfortunate, but a deal is a deal." No such conversation had ever taken place. The gaslighting was so blatant it left me speechless. "How could you do this?" I finally managed to ask. "Your sister has children," Otto Dad said, apparently now on the extension. "What do you need a 4-bedroom house for? Always so selfish." I hung up and sat in my car, parked across from the home that had been stolen from me, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My entire family had conspired against me, fabricating events and documents to steal my inheritance. With nowhere else to go, I drove to Darren's apartment, explaining the situation through stunned disbelief. He immediately offered his couch for as long as I needed it. "We need to get you a lawyer," he said firmly. "A good one. This is not just family drama anymore. It is criminal." The following day, I met with attorney Samuel Winters, a stern, no-nonsense lawyer specializing in property fraud. He reviewed my original deed and will document his expression darkening as I explained the situation. "Unfortunately, I have seen similar cases," he said. "Family fraud is more common than most people realize, and often more devastating because of the betrayal involved." He advised me to file a police report immediately, though he warned me that without clear evidence of forgery, the police might initially treat it as a civil matter rather than criminal. "We will need to hire a private investigator to build our case," he explained, "and file for an emergency injunction to prevent your sister from selling or further encumbering the property." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations, court filings, and sleepless nights on Darren's uncomfortable couch. The private investigator discovered that Rachel had access to notary stamps through a colleague at her real estate office, explaining how she had managed to create seemingly legitimate documents. My personal belongings remained hostage in the house, including family photos, my laptop containing work projects, and even my grandfather's tools that held enormous sentimental value. When I attempted to retrieve essential items, Rachel called the police, reporting me as a trespasser. The responding officers, seeing the deed in Rachel's name, had no choice but to warn me away from the property. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal outside my own home burned deep. Megan provided emotional support through this nightmare, accompanying me to legal appointments and helping me navigate the overwhelming feelings of betrayal. What hurts most, I confessed to her one evening, is not even the house itself. It is knowing that my own family could do this to me. Family should be where we feel safest, she agreed, holding my hand tightly. When they betray that trust, it shakes our entire foundation. During this time, Rachel began sending threatening text messages urging me to let it go and accept reality. When I refused to withdraw my legal challenge, the messages took a darker turn. "You have no idea who you are messing with," she wrote. "You will regret pushing this little brother. Some fights are not worth the consequences." I showed these messages to Attorney Winters, who added them to our growing file of evidence. He advised me to cease all direct communication with Rachel and document any further threats. As we prepared for our first court hearing, I tried to understand how my successful, seemingly perfect sister could resort to fraud and intimidation. What kind of desperation or entitlement would drive someone to such lengths? The sister I thought I knew was disappearing, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone capable of calculated deception and cruelty. The worst was yet to come. The first court hearing regarding the fraudulent deed transfer was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in King County Superior Court. I arrived with Attorney Winters nervous, but determined to fight for my inheritance. The courtroom was imposing with its high ceilings and wood paneling reminiscent of courtroom dramas I had seen on television, though far less dramatic in real life. Rachel arrived with not one but two attorneys from a prestigious Seattle law firm dressed impeccably in a conservative Navy suit that screamed success and credibility. Our parents sat directly behind her, presenting a united family front against me, the apparent troublemaker. Judge Miranda Sullivan, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the initial filings with a neutral expression that revealed nothing of her thoughts on the case. "Your Honor," my attorney began, "we have clear evidence that the deed transfer in question was fraudulent. My client never signed this document, never agreed to transfer his property, and was in fact out of state on the date the document was allegedly signed and notarized." He presented my work travel records and credit card statements, proving I had been in Portland for an engineering conference on the date in question. Rachel's attorney, a slick man named Preston Wallace, dismissed this evidence with a wave of his hand. "Your Honor, family property transfers are often informal affairs. Mr. Johnson verbally agreed to transfer the property to his sister after recognizing the inequity of their grandparents' will. The documentation was merely a formality completed later." Judge Sullivan frowned. "That does not explain the notary stamp indicating Mr. Johnson was physically present for the signing." "A clerical error," Wallace claimed smoothly. "One that does not negate the verbal agreement witnessed by the Johnson parents." My parents were called to testify, and I watched in disbelief as they perjured themselves under oath describing a fictional family dinner where I had supposedly agreed to sign over the house to Rachel. Otto admitted that Rachel deserved the house more because she has children who need the space, my mother claimed, avoiding my gaze completely. He said he felt guilty about the will and wanted to make it right, my father added. Their performances were convincing. If I had not lived my own life, I might have believed them myself. When my turn came to testify, I stated plainly that no such conversation ever occurred, that I had never agreed to transfer the property, and that my signature on the deed had been forged. "Why would your entire family lie about this?" Rachel's attorney asked during cross-examination. "Because my sister has always been the golden child who gets whatever she wants," I replied honestly. "And because the house is worth nearly $500,000 in today's market." The judge called a recess to review the evidence. During the break, I noticed Rachel's husband, Bradley, looking uncomfortable, fidgeting with his tie, and avoiding eye contact with everyone, including his wife. When court resumed, Judge Sullivan made her initial ruling. Based on the contradictory testimony and serious allegations of document fraud, I am issuing a temporary injunction. The property cannot be sold, transferred, or significantly altered until ownership is definitively established. Both parties are to maintain status quo, meaning Mr. Johnson may retrieve his personal belongings from the property accompanied by a court officer, but residence remains with the current deed holder pending investigation. It was not the victory I had hoped for, but at least Rachel could not sell the house while the case proceeded. As we exited the courtroom, George and Elaine Waters, my grandparents' longtime neighbors, approached me in the hallway. "Otto, we saw Rachel entering your house multiple times when you were at work before all this happened," George said quietly. She always used a key, so we thought nothing of it. But after seeing the notice about the court case posted on the property, we realized something was wrong. This was exactly the kind of witness testimony we needed. Attorney Winters took their contact information and arranged for formal statements. The legal proceedings intensified over the following weeks. We hired a forensic document examiner who testified that the signature on the fraudulent deed was not mine but a skilled forgery. Rachel's team countered with their own expert, claiming the signature analysis was inconclusive. Meanwhile, the personal cost of the battle continued to mount. I took a leave of absence from work when the stress began affecting my performance. My savings dwindled as legal fees accumulated. The strain showed in my health, with weight loss and insomnia becoming my new normal. Rachel, seemingly unfazed by the legal challenge, began renovating my grandparents' house, tearing out the original fixtures and custom woodwork that our grandfather had crafted by hand. Each dumpster of discarded materials I saw outside the house felt like another piece of my heritage destroyed. One evening as I drove home to Darren's apartment, I noticed a black SUV following me. It maintained a consistent distance through several turns, including a deliberate detour I took to confirm my suspicions. When I pulled into a gas station, the vehicle drove past slowly, the driver's face obscured by tinted windows. The following day, Darren called me at work, his voice tense. "Someone broke into the apartment," he said. "They went through all your stuff. Your files are scattered everywhere." I rushed back to find the apartment in disarray. My legal documents had been rifled through, but oddly valuable electronics remained untouched. This was not a random burglary. Someone had been looking for specific information. Attorney Winters advised me to install security cameras at Darren's apartment and to vary my routine. "This case has clearly escalated beyond a simple property dispute," he said gravely. I began receiving anonymous emails from untraceable accounts containing veiled threats. Accidents happen to people who do not mind their own business. Sometimes problems disappear when you stop causing trouble. Each message was carefully worded to avoid explicit threats, but the intent was clear. I forwarded them to my attorney and the police, who opened a harassment file, but explained that without clear evidence linking the messages to Rachel, there was little they could do. At the second court hearing, my case strengthened with the testimony of the neighbors and the document examiner. Rachel's demeanor changed noticeably, her previously cool confidence giving way to visible agitation. Judge Sullivan, concerned by the mounting evidence of fraud, issued a stronger ruling. The property transfer is hereby frozen pending criminal investigation. The court has sufficient evidence to suggest document fraud and will refer this matter to the prosecutor's office for review. As we stood to leave, Rachel locked eyes with me across the courtroom, her gaze burning with undisguised hatred. "This is not over," she hissed as she brushed past me. "Not even close." That night I installed additional security measures at Darren's apartment, including motion sensor lights and a doorbell camera. Megan suggested I stay with her, instead concerned that Darren might become collateral damage in Rachel's vendetta against me. Whatever she is planning, Megan warned, she is getting desperate. Desperate people are unpredictable. Little did we know just how desperate my sister had become, or how far she was willing to go to win. The case took a dramatic turn when Attorney Winters received a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Due to the use of the United States Postal Service in the commission of fraud and evidence of interstate banking violations, the FBI had jurisdiction over certain aspects of the case. Agent Marcus Wilson, a veteran investigator with the White Collar Crime Division, arranged to meet with me the following day. Agent Wilson was nothing like the FBI agents portrayed in movies. Middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, he looked more like an accountant than a federal agent. But his methodical approach and penetrating questions revealed a sharp mind behind his unassuming appearance. "We have been monitoring several cases involving fraudulent property transfers in the greater Seattle area," he explained, as we sat in a sterile conference room at the FBI field office. "Your case caught our attention because of certain patterns consistent with other investigations." He showed me files on 3 other cases where property owners had their deeds fraudulently transferred, all involving the same notary stamp that had been used on my forged documents. "We believe your sister may be connected to these other cases through her real estate work," Agent Wilson explained. Does the name Victor Reyes mean anything to you? I shook my head, not recognizing the name. He is a former client of your sister's real estate agency. He has a record for fraud and identity theft, and we believe he may have been helping her create and file fraudulent documents. The implication that Rachel might be involved in a larger fraud scheme beyond just my house was staggering. Had my case inadvertently exposed a criminal operation? 2 days later, I received an unexpected text message from Bradley, Rachel's husband. Need to talk. Not at home or office. Important. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near my workplace, a location unlikely to be frequented by anyone in Rachel's circle. Bradley arrived looking haggard with dark circles under his eyes, and his usually immaculate appearance noticeably disheveled. I did not know how bad it was, he began without preamble, his voice low. I swear to you, Otto, I thought it was just a family disagreement about inheritance. I never thought she would. He trailed off, glancing nervously around the cafe. What did you think she would not do? I prompted. Bradley ran a hand through his hair. The forgery, the lies, and now this obsession with destroying you. It is like she is possessed. I do not recognize her anymore. He slid a USB drive across the table. I found these on her laptop. Financial records, communications with someone named Victor, and other documents she has been forging. Not just for your house. There are others. I immediately contacted Agent Wilson, who arranged for Bradley to provide a formal statement. The USB drive contained a trove of incriminating evidence, emails between Rachel and Victor Reyes discussing document forgery techniques, financial records showing unusual cash payments, and a folder labeled Auto Problem, containing surveillance photos of me, my work schedule, and notes about my daily routine. Based on this new evidence, the FBI obtained search warrants for Rachel's home office and electronic devices. Early on a Thursday morning, agents simultaneously executed these warrants, seizing computers, phones, and documents. What they discovered sent shockwaves through everyone involved in the case. Hidden in a locked cabinet in Rachel's home office was a detailed journal outlining her plans to not only take my house, but to eliminate me entirely if I continued to fight her. The journal contained chilling entries. If legal means fail, accidents can be arranged. Otto drives that winding road to work every day. Brake lines are surprisingly vulnerable, untraceable if done correctly. Another entry read, VR knows someone who can make problems disappear permanently. Expensive, but might be necessary if Otto won't back down. Worth investigating as last resort. Most disturbing were the detailed scenarios she had outlined for staging my accident, complete with alibi preparations and methods to avoid detection. The final page of the journal contained a prioritized to-do list with my name at the top, followed by the words, permanent solution, and a timeline for implementation. The FBI also uncovered evidence linking Rachel and Victor Reyes to the suspicious deaths of 2 other property owners whose homes had been acquired through questionable transactions. One victim, an elderly man named Howard Feldman, had died in an apparent accidental fall down his stairs, just days after filing a complaint about a fraudulent deed transfer. Another, Sarah Chen, had suffered fatal carbon monoxide poisoning, attributed to a faulty water heater, shortly after initiating legal action to reclaim her property. In Rachel's garage, agents found a container of the same brake fluid used in my Honda receipts for purchases of various chemicals and handwritten notes about untraceable methods and staged accidents. Agent Wilson called me personally to warn me not to drive my car or return to Darren's apartment alone. We have reason to believe your life may be in imminent danger, he said grimly. We are arranging protective surveillance until we can take your sister into custody. Rachel was arrested later that day at her real estate office, led out in handcuffs past shocked colleagues. The local news carried footage of the arrest, her face a mask of indignation, as she repeatedly proclaimed her innocence to the cameras. My parents, finally confronted with undeniable evidence of Rachel's crimes, seemed to crumble under the weight of the truth. My father called me, his voice breaking. We never thought she would. We did not know about. He struggled to complete a sentence. Otto, what have we done? I had no words of comfort to offer him. The betrayal was too profound, the damage too extensive. As I sat in Agent Wilson's office reviewing the evidence against my sister, I struggled to reconcile the Rachel I had grown up with the golden child, who could do no wrong, with this calculating criminal willing to commit murder to get what she wanted. Had she always been this person beneath the perfect exterior? Had our family's blind adoration created this monster, or merely failed to recognize what was already there? The most chilling realization was how close she had come to succeeding. According to the timeline in her journal, she had planned to sabotage my car the very next weekend. If Bradley had not come forward when he did, I might not have lived to see justice done. The FBI provided me with temporary protection, while the investigation continued, stationing an agent near Darren's apartment and escorting me to and from work. My car was impounded as evidence after agents discovered that someone had already begun tampering with the brake lines. As news of Rachel's arrest spread, other victims of similar fraud schemes came forward, their stories eerily similar to mine. The scope of the investigation expanded, revealing a network of property fraud that had operated undetected for years, with my sister apparently at its center. The district attorney, Lawrence Mitchell, took a personal interest in the case, assigning his top prosecutor to ensure that Rachel and her accomplices would face the most serious charges possible. "This case goes beyond fraud," he told me during our first meeting. "The evidence suggests premeditated murder plans. We will be pursuing this to the fullest extent of the law." As I prepared to testify before the grand jury, I grappled with conflicting emotions: relief at my narrow escape, grief for the sister I thought I knew, and lingering questions about how our family dynamic had contributed to this tragedy. The golden child had fallen, but the cost of that fall extended far beyond Rachel herself. The criminal trial of Rachel Thompson began 8 months after her arrest in a packed courtroom that buzzed with media attention. The case had captured public interest, featured on national news and true crime podcasts, as a cautionary tale of family betrayal and fraud turned deadly. District Attorney Lawrence Mitchell chose to prosecute the case, personally underscoring its significance. In his opening statement, he painted a damning portrait of Rachel as a narcissistic manipulator whose sense of entitlement led her down an increasingly dark path. "This case is about more than property fraud," he told the jury, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. "It is about what happens when privilege and favoritism curdle into deadly entitlement." Rachel Thompson believed she deserved everything, including property that legally belonged to others. When challenged, she did not just forge documents. She plotted murder. Rachel sat at the defense table in a modest beige sweater that contrasted sharply with her usual designer attire, a calculated attempt to appear relatable and harmless. Her attorney, different from the one who had represented her in civil court, specialized in criminal defense and had constructed a narrative painting Rachel as a misunderstood victim of circumstance and overzealous prosecution. "My client has been villainized by selective evidence and circumstantial connections," the defense attorney claimed in her opening statement. What the prosecution calls murder plans were merely fictional scenarios written as a stress relief exercise, never intended for action. Rachel Thompson is guilty of poor judgment, perhaps, but not attempted murder. The prosecution methodically presented the evidence gathered by the FBI, the forged documents, the journal containing murder plans, the partially sabotaged brake lines of my car, and the connections to other suspicious deaths of property owners who had challenged Rachel's fraudulent acquisitions. Forensic accountant Audrey Green testified about the complex web of financial transactions that revealed Rachel's hidden money troubles beneath her facade of success. Despite appearances, the defendant was nearly $2 million in debt, Green explained, presenting charts showing Rachel's declining commissions and increasing personal expenditures. Her luxurious lifestyle was funded by mounting credit card debt and loans. The properties acquired through fraudulent means were quickly mortgaged or sold to maintain this facade. Victor Reyes, Rachel's accomplice who had accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, described in detail how their scheme operated. She would identify vulnerable property owners, usually elderly people, or those who had recently inherited property, and might be unfamiliar with the legal details, Reyes testified. We would create forged documents transferring ownership, file them with the county, and quickly take possession before the victims realized what had happened. When asked about the murder plans, Reyes confirmed their deadly intent. She said if her brother kept fighting for the house, we would have to take more permanent measures. She was obsessed with not losing to him. Said it would ruin her perfect record. My own testimony took place on the 4th day of the trial. As I took the stand and was sworn in, I finally looked directly at Rachel. The sister I had grown up with was barely recognizable in the hollow-eyed woman who stared back at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. I testified about our family dynamic, the inheritance, and the escalating events that led to the discovery of the fraud. The prosecution had advised me to stick to facts and avoid emotional language, but it was difficult to describe such personal betrayal in clinical terms. "When did you first realize your life might be in danger?" the prosecutor asked. When Agent Wilson showed me the journal, I replied. The detailed plans for staging my accident. The timeline. The to-do list with my name at the top, marked for a permanent solution. That is when I understood this had gone far beyond a property dispute. During cross-examination, Rachel's attorney tried to suggest that I had manipulated our grandparents into leaving me the house, that I had always been jealous of Rachel's success, that the entire case stemmed from lifelong sibling rivalry. I remained calm, answering truthfully, while the absurdity of her accusations hung in the air. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Bradley took the stand against his wife. Rachel visibly flinched as her husband walked to the witness box, refusing to meet his eyes. "When did you first become aware of your wife's fraudulent activities?" the prosecutor asked. Bradley sighed heavily. "I had suspicions for about a year before Otto's case. Strange cash deposits, late-night meetings, she would not explain. But I convinced myself it was just aggressive real estate tactics. I did not want to see the truth." He described finding the journal while looking for tax documents. "At first I thought it was fiction, some kind of twisted creative writing. But then I saw the brake fluid receipt stapled to a page detailing how to make car accidents look natural, and I knew." "Why did you decide to come forward?" the prosecutor asked. Bradley's voice broke. "Because despite everything, I could not let her kill her own brother, and because our children deserve a father who stood up for what was right, even when it was the hardest thing I have ever done." As the trial progressed, my parents sat in the courtroom daily, looking increasingly diminished. The golden child narrative they had nurtured for decades was crumbling before their eyes, replaced by the horrifying reality of who Rachel had become, perhaps partly due to their own enabling. On the trial's 10th day, as the forensic evidence about my sabotaged brake lines was being presented, Rachel suddenly stood up, her face contorted. "He always got everything," she shouted, pointing at me. "The love, the attention, the house, everyone acting like he was so special when I was the one who achieved everything. It should have been mine." Her outburst confirmed what the prosecution had been arguing. Rachel's sense of entitlement and resentment had driven her actions. Despite her attorney's attempts to portray the outburst as an emotional response to stress, the damage to her defense was irreparable. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning with their verdict. As the foreman stood to announce their decision, the courtroom fell completely silent. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Rachel Thompson guilty. Additional guilty verdicts followed for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and attempted murder. Rachel showed no reaction. As the verdicts were read, her face a blank mask. Outside the courthouse, I faced a barrage of reporters answering a few questions briefly before being escorted to a waiting car. The case had made me an unwilling public figure. My private family trauma now fodder for news cycles and social media discussion. That evening, my parents came to Megan's apartment, where I had been staying throughout the trial. Our first private conversation since Rachel's arrest was awkward and painful. "We enabled her," my mother admitted, tears streaming down her face. "We taught her she was entitled to everything she wanted. We never made her earn anything or face consequences. We failed both of you," my father added. "Her by spoiling her, and you by never giving you the recognition you deserved." Their apology, while sincere, could not erase decades of favoritism or the trauma of recent events. I accepted it quietly, but made no promises about our future relationship. Some wounds were too fresh to address. In the aftermath of the trial, I connected with other victims of similar fraud schemes, including relatives of Howard Feldman and Sarah Chen, whose deaths were being reinvestigated as potential homicides. We formed an informal support group sharing resources and emotional support as we navigated the complex process of reclaiming our stolen properties and rebuilding our lives. The media attention eventually faded, but the psychological impact lingered. I began working with a therapist specializing in family trauma, slowly processing the complex grief of losing my sister not to death, but to her own criminal choices, and losing my parents to the realization that our family narrative had been built on harmful foundations. As Rachel awaited sentencing, I worked to reclaim not just my grandparents' house, but my sense of security and trust, both profoundly shaken by her betrayal. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time it would be one I defined for myself, free from the shadow of the golden child. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in early spring, almost exactly 1 year after I had discovered the fraudulent transfer of my grandparents' house. The courtroom was more subdued than during the trial, with fewer spectators and media representatives, though the case still commanded significant attention. Rachel entered wearing a simple gray dress, her previously highlighted hair now showing dark roots, her designer accessories replaced by standard-issue, court-appropriate attire. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by the weight of her crimes and the prospect of her future. Judge Victoria Peterson, who had presided over the trial with impartial efficiency, addressed the court with a stern expression. Before I pronounce sentence, I will hear impact statements from victims and allow the defendant to speak if she wishes. I had prepared a statement with the help of my therapist focusing on the emotional and psychological impact of my sister's betrayal rather than anger or condemnation. When called to speak, I approached the podium, my prepared notes in hand, but found myself making eye contact with Rachel instead of reading from the paper. I keep asking myself, when my sister became someone capable of planning my murder, I began my voice steadier than I expected. Was it a sudden decision when I refused to give up my inheritance, or was this darkness always inside her, nurtured by a lifetime of entitlement and favoritism? I may never know the answer. I described the loss of security, the fracturing of my family, and the lingering fear that still accompanied me daily. The house Rachel tried to steal was never just about property or money to me. It represented the unconditional love and acceptance our grandparents gave me, something I rarely found elsewhere in our family. Perhaps that is what Rachel truly wanted to take from me, not just the physical structure but the validation it represented. I concluded by addressing the court rather than my sister. No sentence can restore what was lost: my sense of safety, my trust in family, my belief in the person I thought my sister was. I can only hope that whatever sentence is imposed will prevent Rachel from harming others and perhaps give her time to reflect on the choices that led us here. Bradley spoke next, his statement, focusing on their 2 children and the devastating impact of Rachel's crimes on their young lives. They ask when mommy is coming home, and I have no answer that makes sense to a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, he said, his voice breaking. How do you explain to children that the mother they adore planned to kill their uncle? When it was Rachel's turn to speak, she approached the podium with rehearsed remorse. Her attorney had likely coached her on the importance of showing contrition, but her performance lacked authenticity. I deeply regret my actions and the pain I have caused, she said, her voice carefully modulated. I was under tremendous financial and emotional pressure. I made terrible mistakes that I will regret for the rest of my life. Not once did she look at me during her statement, nor did she directly apologize to me or the other victims. Her focus remained on presenting herself as a sympathetic figure worthy of leniency. Judge Peterson was not swayed. Her sentencing statement addressed the calculated nature of the crimes and the profound breach of trust they represented. Miss Thompson, your case represents one of the most disturbing examples of family betrayal this court has encountered, she began. Your crimes were not impulsive acts of passion, but calculated schemes carried out over months, escalating from fraud to attempted murder when your initial plans were thwarted. The judge referenced the evidence linking Rachel to other suspicious deaths, noting that while those investigations were ongoing, the pattern of escalation was clear and deeply troubling. Most concerning to this court is your complete lack of genuine remorse, Judge Peterson continued. Your statements today, like your testimony during trial, focus on justifying your actions rather than acknowledging the harm you caused. You present yourself as a victim of circumstance rather than the architect of calculated crimes. The sentence, when delivered, exceeded even the prosecution's recommendations: life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 30 years for the conspiracy to commit murder charge, with additional consecutive sentences for the plouf, multiple fraud convictions. The severity of this sentence reflects not only the gravity of your crimes, but the continuing danger you present to society, particularly to those who stand between you and what you believe you deserve, the judge concluded. Rachel finally showed genuine emotion, then her composure cracking as the reality of her future sank in. She looked frantically toward our parents, perhaps expecting them to rush to her defense, as they had throughout her life. They remained seated, their expressions a mixture of grief and resignation. As Rachel was led away by court officers, our eyes met briefly. In that moment, I saw not the golden child or the calculating criminal, but someone I no longer knew or understood, a stranger wearing my sister's face. After the sentencing, I requested and was granted permission to visit Rachel in the detention center before her transfer to state prison. I was not sure why I wanted this meeting, but something in me needed closure, a final conversation to complete the severing of our sibling bond. We sat across from each other at a scratched metal table separated by reinforced glass. The prison jumpsuit hung loosely on her frame, her makeup-free face making her look younger and oddly vulnerable. "Why did you want to see me?" she asked immediately, no greeting or preamble. "I need to understand," I replied simply. "When did you start hating me enough to plan my death?" Rachel's laugh was brittle. "I do not hate you, Otto. I never did. You were just in my way." "In your way of what? A house money?" "In my way of being the only one who mattered," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Do you have any idea what it is like to be perfect all the time? To know that one mistake, one failure would shatter everything? You had the luxury of being average. I never did." Her words revealed a twisted perspective. I had never considered how the golden child pedestal could become a prison of its own, creating a desperate fear of falling that justified any action to maintain status and appearance. "That does not excuse planning to kill me," I said quietly. "No, it does not," she agreed, surprising me with this small acknowledgement. "But nothing in our family was ever what it seemed, was it? Not even success." We talked for 20 minutes more, a strange conversation that offered no real reconciliation but provided a kind of ending. As I stood to leave, Rachel called after me. "The house. Was it worth all this?" I considered her question carefully. "The house was never the point, Rachel. It was about being seen and valued for once. Something you always had, and I never did until our grandparents recognized me in their will." Her expression remained unreadable as I turned and walked away, closing the chapter on our relationship permanently. Reclaiming my grandparents' house proved straightforward after the criminal convictions. The court invalidated all fraudulent transfers, returning clear title to me. Returning to live there, however, was more complicated emotionally. The house had been tainted by Rachel's actions, and the knowledge of what might have happened there had her plans succeeded. For weeks I stayed with Megan, uncertain whether I could ever feel at peace in the property again. "The house is just a structure," Megan reminded me gently. "Your grandparents' legacy is in the values they taught you, not the building itself. Whatever you decide to do with it should bring you peace, not obligation." After much reflection, I decided to reclaim the space, rather than let Rachel's actions rob me of this final connection to my grandparents. Megan and I began careful renovations, undoing Rachel's hasty and characterless modifications, and restoring much of the original craftsmanship, while modernizing systems and creating a home that represented our future rather than just preserving the past. My relationship with my parents evolved into something cautious and limited. We spoke occasionally by phone, met for brief coffees every few months, but the easy reconciliation they seemed to expect never materialized. The damage was too profound, the trust too thoroughly broken, to simply resume normal relations. "We understand if you cannot forgive us," my father said during one of our awkward meetings. "We are trying to understand where we went so wrong." "It was never about forgiveness," I explained. "It is about protecting myself from people who have shown they will sacrifice me for Rachel even now." They had visited Rachel in prison weekly since her sentencing, continuing to prioritize her needs. Above all else, a pattern too ingrained to break even after everything that had happened. Professionally, I returned to my engineering work, finding satisfaction in creating structures designed to support and protect rather than to impress or dominate. Megan moved in with me 6 months after the sentencing, her steady presence, helping transform the house from a site of trauma to a home filled with new positive memories. With the settlement from the civil case against Rachel's estate and her share of restitution payments, I established a small foundation to assist victims of family fraud, offering both legal resources and psychological support to those, quote, navigating similar betrayals. Working with other victims proved unexpectedly healing, creating community from shared trauma and purpose from pain. 2 years after Rachel's sentencing, I received a letter from Bradley, who had relocated with their children to another state and begun building a new life away from the shadow of Rachel's crimes. He enclosed drawings the children had made and a note of gratitude for my decision not to cut ties with them despite everything that had happened. They deserve to know the uncle who showed more integrity than either of their parents, he wrote. When they are older, I will tell them the full truth. For now, I am teaching them that family is about love and respect, not competition or possession. The lessons of Rachel's betrayal continued to reveal themselves over time, reshaping my understanding of family success and self-worth. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation and entitlement in relationships, to value authenticity over achievement, and to build connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or role fulfillment. Most importantly, I discovered that healing does not mean erasing the past or pretending the harm never occurred. It means integrating the experience into a larger narrative that acknowledges the pain while refusing to be defined by it. As I stand in my grandparents' garden, now flourishing again with grandma's heirloom tomatoes and grandpa's carefully grafted fruit trees, I reflect on the journey from betrayal to rebuilding. The golden child narrative that dominated our family has been permanently shattered, replaced by a more complicated truth about how favoritism damages not only the scapegoat, but the favorite as well, creating distorted perspectives that can lead to devastating consequences. My story is not one with a simple, happy ending. There is no perfect resolution when family becomes both weapon and wound. But there is resilience, growth, and the freedom to define family by choice rather than blood, surrounding yourself with people who value you for exactly who you are, not for what you achieve or provide. Have you ever experienced favoritism in your family? What warning signs of toxic relationships have you noticed in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember that family should be a source of support, not competition, and sometimes the family we choose brings more healing than the one we were born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to protect your boundaries and your peace, no matter who challenges them.